Let's start by recognizing just how strange this is. Believing that someone came back to life on the third day after he was placed in a cave tomb nearly 2,000 years ago. Now, I consider myself a rational kind of person, someone who follows the evidence. I don't believe this has happened to anybody else. So why do I believe that this has happened to Jesus, that he was raised from the dead? So, in part, this is a historical question. It's about whether something has happened in history. And to do justice, it needs time looking at all the details, all the circumstances surrounding the event, and establishing some of the facts. Things like the fact that Jesus of Nazareth was a person who existed and he died by crucifixion. We see evidence for that in the Gospels themselves as historical sources, and also historians such as Josephus and Tacitus. The details and facts are that the tomb was empty on the third day following his death. You see, you get at the end of Matthew's Gospel something about the Jewish priests and the rulers claiming that the disciples had in fact stolen the body of Jesus. You see, they didn't deny that the body was missing. They could have gone to the tomb and produced his body to prove that this was a fraud. So this shows that both those claiming the resurrection of Jesus and those opposing it all agreed that the tomb was empty. We could look at the facts about the disciples of Jesus and how that they were completely transformed from people who were timid and disbelieving to people who became bold and stubborn in the face of persecution and death. You see, they really believed what they were saying. They really believed that they had seen Jesus alive again, and they believed he had been resurrected. And we could look at things around the opponents of Jesus, such as Saul of Tarsus, who became known as the Apostle Paul, and how that even he, an opponent of Jesus, he believed that Jesus had been raised from the dead as well. So all these sorts of facts and details surrounding the historical event or the historical claim that we need to sort of spend a lot of time looking at. There's lots of resources that do that, and that's a very important thing to do. But right now, I want to take a bit of a step back and just think a little bit more broadly about the wider situation. And that is, why am I even having this conversation right now? Why are we even asking this question? Which really goes back to, well, why does Christianity even exist? What's the reason behind this sudden emergence of a Jewish sect that we now call Christianity? You know, this Jewish sect suddenly emerged in history, and in about 20 years or so after the first people who called themselves Christians or were called Christians, about 20 years later, it had spread so much from Jerusalem that it even had reached Rome, to the point that it had caused so much of a disturbance that the Emperor Claudius had banished Jewish Christians, or perhaps even all Jews, from Rome. That's some remarkable thing that had happened in history. So what caused it? What has caused Christianity to start, to spread so wildly, and to exist like that? And why is it? What are the features of Christianity, this strange Jewish sect that suddenly emerged out of history? Why was it that it had so many innovations? It had baptism and insisted on baptism for those who became members of the Christian communities, the church. They met on a Sunday as well, or instead as the Sabbath Sabbath keepings on the Saturday. They met together when they did on the Sunday with a ritual meal that they shared together. They shared bread and wine that symbolized someone's flesh and blood. You know, this is something unheard of in Jewish practice before that point in time. Embraced non-Jews, Gentiles, within their community and within their gatherings as well. They brought together cultures, different different social classes, different parts of society from the highest to the lowest, and they all shared the same meals together. And that, in a way, was something so threatening to Roman social norms at the time. What was it that caused them to do that? Why did they innovate in their understanding of the Jewish word Messiah, the Saviour, the anointed king, one who was coming to rule and restore the Jewish kingdom? Why did they innovate on that so that the understanding changed to suddenly mean that the Messiah had died to save? What caused that belief, that change in belief? Why did they change the understanding of resurrection, which they expected to be at the end of time, in the last days, like Daniel chapter 12 says in the Old Testament? But they now had included the fact that the bodily resurrection of one man had commenced this last days. He was the first fruit, the first person to be raised from the dead in this way. The man who they claimed was the Christ, the Messiah, that is Jesus. What made them change that view and teach these things suddenly in this period? Those last couple of things are really important. You see, there were many people who claimed to be the Messiah. They claimed to be the saviors, the anointed, the person in Jerusalem who would save the Jewish people from the oppressors, from the Roman Empire. Many people claim to be Messiah both before and after Jesus. You can read about that in Acts chapter 5 in the New Testament, or indeed in Josephus and other historians. Many people claimed to be that anointed one. They led revolutions against Rome, against the Roman occupation. But when they died, their following fizzled out. No one claims that they were the Messiah after their death. How could you be the savior? How could you be the Messiah if you die and your mission fails because you haven't saved the people from the oppressor? But with Jesus, it was very different. Even after he had died and it looked like his mission had failed, his mission to announce the kingdom and to announce the rule of God again, it looked like that had failed. And yet it was different. Why? Why did people carry on claiming that Jesus was indeed the Christ, the Messiah, the Saviour, the Anointed? Why was it that they carried on claiming all those things? Along with all those other innovations, why did they happen so suddenly? What's the historical reason for it? And before anyone knew it, Christianity in this form had spread throughout the Roman Empire. It started as this strange Jewish sect and had spread throughout the Roman Empire, threatening social norms, threatening customs, and transforming the world as it was then known. So much so that it was very quickly became the threat, a threat enough to be stamped on and persecuted by those who had been challenged by its teaching. So the historical question again, what happened to explain all of those things? What happened that fits all the detailed facts? So there's some things like the empty tomb, the belief that the disciples had, their conviction that was strong, that the belief that they'd seen Jesus, the fact that opponents changed their minds, all those different detailed facts. So, something happened which must explain those things. But whatever it is, it must also explain the whole historical narrative as well. Something has happened in history that accounts for all those things. It's been a long time since this claim, and in the last 2,000 years or so, there's been lots of suggestions as to what happened, lots of naturalistic suggestions. That is, explanations that don't invoke God, that explain away the resurrection. Explanations such as, well, the disciples perhaps stole the body and then spread the lie. Perhaps they went to the wrong tomb and saw the empty tomb and then went on believing that Jesus had been raised from the dead. Perhaps they were hallucinating through their grief, and they saw Jesus in their hallucinations and then thought that he was alive again. And again, a lot of those explanations need the time to place alongside the detail and the many resources that go through those things in detail do that. And none of those explanations really work. None of them explain all the facts in one go. Whatever it is that happened must explain everything. It must have sufficient explanatory power to explain all those different facts, those details, and the wider historical narrative, the things that have happened. For example, the disciples, we see that the disciples really did believe that what they were saying, what they were preaching, that Jesus had risen bodily from the dead. They really did believe that. So they couldn't have stolen the body from the tomb because they were living a lie. That doesn't fit the facts as we know it. The tomb really was empty. So they couldn't have just gone to the wrong tomb because had they done that, well, the rulers, the authorities could have easily have produced the body and shown that their mistaken belief in the resurrection of Jesus was just that, mistaken, because the real tomb wasn't actually empty. But they couldn't do that. We've seen that. These are just examples. There's many other explanations have come, been examined and discarded. The simplest explanation for all these things is that Jesus was actually resurrected from the dead. It is an astonishing claim. That's exactly how I started, and it's no less astonishing, having talked through these things, it's no less astonishing once you've examined all those details systematically, methodically, and gone through those things completely. It's very remarkable. It is almost unbelievable. It requires a worldview in which there is a God who really is interested in this world, who really is interested in humanity. It requires belief in that. And that might be too much for many to accept. It might be a lot for people to accept. And I understand that. It's hard for me to accept as well. But what alternative do I have? If I don't believe that Jesus has risen from the dead, what alternative is there? What other explanation is there? The only explanation that adequately fits the evidence, the whole circumstances in history, that gives reason for the rise of Christianity as we know it, and it explains all those things, the only explanation is that Jesus indeed had been resurrected from the dead. You see, that's the rational position. That's where the evidence leads. If I turn back, if I deny that, if I think that can't be the case because of my presupposition in the worldview that I see and that I have, if I deny that, I'm actually having to make a leap of faith in a naturalistic explanation that to date, I've got no way of knowing what that might look like. There's no other natural explanation that really works, that fits the evidence. I'm putting faith in there being some explanation. I've got no idea what that would look like. There's the evidence all surrounding everything that we've looked at, the very existence of Christianity that emerged from the Jewish faith, the very existence of this is something that needs an explanation. And the simplest one is that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, if you put that alongside all other pointers or signposts towards there being a God, or evidences that seem to suggest that there is a God who has created this world. There is something behind this universe. You know, things like the fact there needs to be some sort of first cause to the universe. Things like, well, there is morality and we all accept there is good and evil. You know, things like that. Things that don't prove that God exists in and of themselves, but things that point towards it. They're signposts to it. And put this, the evidence of the resurrection of Jesus, alongside all of that, and it just starts to make sense. It does make sense. And rationally, it's the only thing that I can accept. Putting this alongside all those other things, the rational, the logical response is to say, yes, actually, as much as taking on this worldview is actually hard because my day-to-day experience seems to suggest otherwise, actually, all the evidence points towards this event having happened in history, and therefore there is a God. In New Testament, in the book Acts, in chapter 17, verse 31, we have this. It says that God has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this, he's given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. You see, that basically means that God is keen on saving the world by his righteousness. That's his salvation. He's really keen on this world. And the resurrection of Jesus is the assurance. It's the reason that we can believe that. It's the reason that we can believe that God really does care about this world. Now, that really is good news.